Due Process, winner of 12 New York and Mid-Atlantic Emmys, including the 2008 award for Best Discussion Series.
If you looked at any one detainee, it looked like that might be the wrong person there. But it turned out if you looked at all of them, it became clear that almost all of them were the wrong people there.
But will Guantanamo finally be shut down with a new man in the White House? And what's next for gay marriage, now that California voters have had their say? Just two of the stories we've worked this year, just two of the stories we update on this special year-end edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy.
It's become an annual tradition here on Due Process, a sampling of some of the year's top justice stories and what's happened since we first reported them. I'm Raymond Brown.
And I'm Sandra King, and what a year it's been for legal and social justice, from gay rights to guns, from FBI guidelines to Guantanamo.
But no legal issue has had more ups and downs, more public dispute, and more attention this year than gay marriage. In New Jersey, the front burner question was, do same-sex civil unions, now legal here, really provide the same rights and protections as marriage?
Civil union partner. Yes. There's a mouthful for you. Yes.
Civil union, the company said, was not marriage. So although they granted spousal benefits in Massachusetts, where gays have been allowed to marry for 4 years, New Jersey was a different story. And it's all a matter of one word?
Marriage.
Yes.
Yep. Yep.
That's the big
yep.
word.
And that was the issue with UPS.
Yes.
But Tom filed an appeal, and the governor got involved, telling UPS that the law requires equal treatment.
Just wanted what the state told us we were going to be getting.
Yeah.
We just wanted to be treated the same and get, be able to put him on my benefits.
And UPS did quickly comply. But gay advocates say that the case underscored how civil unions fall short.
From the bar's perspective, civil unions are a failed experiment. They have been shown to perpetuate an unacceptable second-class legal status.
We've gotten 70,000 petitions statewide and are continuing the process of people saying that they do want to see marriage preserved as the union of one man and one woman.
And the push for a constitutional amendment here may be fueled by legalization last month of gay marriage in California.
What a day in San Francisco! What a day in California! What a day for America!
But the jubilation in San Francisco when the state Supreme Court declared gay marriage law was to be short-lived. Just 5 months and 18,000 same-sex weddings later, it was over. California voters November 4th said yes to Proposition 8, Raymond, and no to gay marriage.
Sandy, both nationally and in New Jersey, issues that we thought were pretty well resolved are now opened up to full legal and political debate.
Let's talk first about California, a really crushing, shocking blow to the gay rights movement and to the gay marriage movement, which had seemed to be progressing along to the point where perhaps this was going to be the norm in America, at least in the next couple of decades.
5 months earlier, that had seemed a settled issue. Now, in light of Prop 8, there are going to be complex court challenges which invoke some really subtle issues that are going to take time, and they're going to leave a lot of open questions.
There are court challenges at this point on both sides. Very interesting. On one hand, you have the anti-gay marriage people who are saying that those 18,000 marriages should be set aside, that there should be some retroactive quality to Prop 8. On the other hand, you've got pro-gay marriage, gay rights organizations saying
we've got to challenge this on the basis that you have changed the very basis of equal protection in the California Constitution, and you can't do that with a single majority vote. What do you see coming here?
Each of those are complex issues on their own. One involves complex questions of California constitutional law and maybe whether it invokes the federal Constitution. And on the issue of retroactivity, those 18,000 people who thought they were married, that is a deep question which is probably likely to go all the way to the United States Supreme Court, depending on how it's decided. Years of litigation ahead, not to mention the possibility of, in the next election cycle, having another vote.
Let's talk about New Jersey. We thought this was settled, as you said. We had civil unions. The Supreme Court, of course, had said you've got to do something, but you don't have to call it marriage. And so the legislature was happy not to call it marriage. However, 2 years down the line, we now have a study commission reporting to the legislature and the governor and saying, this thing hasn't worked, it's a disaster. If you want real equality, which the court has said you've got to have, you've got to call it marriage.
Well, this report takes what we thought was a very delicate and subtle political and legal consensus that civil unions were the way forward and just thrown that out the door, meaning we now have an issue of gay marriage squarely presented, although it doesn't necessarily resolve all the issues that this commission began to talk about.
Raymond, this year also saw some major movement on another hot-button issue that inspires nearly as much shrill talk and strong feeling.
Sandy, that would be firearms, the right to keep them, carry them, use them, a right that's been in legal question despite the American romance with the gun.
The fascination with guns is American tradition. The right to own and keep guns, an American obsession.
You're going to pull that down. There you go.
That's cocked?
Yep, ready to go.
Gun rights advocates have long based their claims on the Second Amendment, that some have seen as unassailable, others as just unclear.
I don't think that the Second Amendment has anything to do with individual possession of guns, but that's my view.
There is no doubt about it that the Second Amendment provides for the ownership of weapons. There's no two ways about it.
At issue is the single sentence that reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But the nation's highest court has tended to steer clear, had never directly weighed in until now.
The other side was always saying, oh, it was collective, it meant the militia, it meant other things, and we were always avowing that no, it wasn't, it meant individuals, and so this was a big win for us in that aspect.
In a landmark 5-4 decision, Justice Antonin Scalia wrote that the D.C. ban on handgun possession is illegal, since the Second Amendment surely elevates above all other interests the right of law-abiding, responsible citizens to use arms in defense of hearth and home.
And with that, a D.C. law banning gun possession, even at home, was thrown out. And the fight over what the Second Amendment really meant was finally put to rest, Raymond, or was it?
No. The simple answer is no, and no on two fronts. Some critics have called this a kind of minimalist decision where the court made it clear what the Second Amendment means, but it left open a lot of areas for further litigation and debate.
The court being a majority decision written by Justice Scalia.
Correct. The second question is that the court made this decision in a very controversial area where there's another side that said the right to bear arms is a reference back to the militia language of the Second Amendment. So it's very rare, but one could see 15 or 20 years down the road the court revisiting the heart of this decision. So no, we're not finished with it.
Let's talk about what's happening right now. The NRA has taken great heart from Justice Scalia's decision and has said we're going to go to every gun control piece of legislation that we think we can get knocked out by Heller, and we're going to pursue it. What do you expect to happen? Should we expect that even if in the long term we might see some change in the Scalia decision, do we expect now that all that gun control local legislation just disappears?
It's going to be under attack. This is the most politically and ideologically charged decision since Bush versus Gore. The NRA will try to litigate state by state and city by city ordinances that it doesn't like. And the court itself left open a number of areas. Number one, it's an originalist decision, meaning it's based based on what the framers thought about? Well, the framers
What
were
Scalia
thinking,
thinks the framers thought
well,
of
that's
that.
his philosophy, and it's what prevailed.
Right, but the other side says they were really thinking about a militia.
But he says that if you take the language of the framers, we're really talking about flintlocks. Well, that's not what we're talking about, but it means many categories of weapons that are more complex and modern are not clearly addressed by this opinion. Plus, the court left open the notion of some areas of sensitivity, physical areas like government buildings, might be subject to a different kind of regulation than homes.
Which brings us, I think, Raymond, to the most interesting of the NRA challenges, which is in San Francisco. A rule in the San Francisco Housing Authority says you may not have any guns in public housing. On the face of it, a very reasonable position. However,
well, to use a mixed metaphor, people will be up in arms about this one because it addresses public housing. Now, you could see the court maybe carving out an exception saying maybe this is a sensitive area. On the other hand, to leave open the fact that middle-class people a mile away can have guns in their homes, people in public housing couldn't, would raise equal protection issues that are going to find the civil liberties community probably on both sides of that debate.
but while the Bush court was moving the gun question to the right, there was movement too in a controversial post-9/11 direction on the part of the Bush FBI.
The FBI.
The Fed as super lawman, helping to keep us safe from crime.
A special project team under the direction of Inspector Lewis Erskine was immediately assigned to the case.
But with 9/11, the FBI's mission has broadened again, with emphasis on keeping us safe from acts of terror. And that's where the proposed new guidelines come in.
For the last now 7 years, our government has been telling us that they have to do a lot of things to keep us safe from international terrorism. And a lot of the things they've been telling us they have to do has really taken away a lot of our fundamental constitutional and civil liberties.
I understand that they don't like the idea of this kind of profiling. I understand it. I'm merely suggesting to you that it's a de facto condition. It's a condition in life. It's based on common sense, and it's based on experience.
But the so-called Attorney General guidelines are not public information, so it's not clear exactly what they look like now or what could be coming soon.
It's really a mystery to, I think, the legal community as well as just the public at large, what exactly the FBI uses to make a decision about who they want to investigate for terrorism or crime.
But the Associated Press last month broke the story that the Justice Department may allow the FBI to use race, religion, ethnicity in deciding whether to investigate U.S. citizens for possible threat to national security.
When we first did that story, the new quasi-secret guidelines were pending. Now it's been reported they are official, and in some quarters, Raymond, that has been cause for alarm.
Sandy, this is an important issue, but it's one that's kind of a mixed bag because they don't have to be secret, but they are internal guidelines, direction to the agents about how to conduct their affairs. They're not something that you could easily use in litigation. They're not external. So in that sense, this is something that is a little bit vague, and there is room for some change.
But you know that it's caused great consternation in certain communities, particularly Muslim, Middle Eastern, South Asian communities who have felt themselves under attack by the government and law enforcement in many cases anyway since 9/11. Interesting, though, that the strongest reaction that we've seen is from three very established U.S. senators, Feingold and Kennedy and Durbin, wrote a letter to the Attorney General saying, you can't keep this secret, and you can't go back to racial profiling as an official position of the U.S. government. And guess what? The AG never responded.
Well, it's a fair guess that this administration will respond to that question. It's probably also a fair guess that President Obama, then president, will not stand by and allow profiling to play a high role as a trigger if it's based on race. On the other hand, this administration is going to have to prove to the body politic that it's tough on terrorism and on enforcement generally, so we're probably going to get a mixed bag of change, probably with a significant lowering of the racial component of profiling.
Another one of these situations, do you think, where President Obama is going to find himself attacked from the right and the left and having to find that middle ground?
He has a natural civil liberties constituency, but on the other hand, he has a deep need to demonstrate that he's tough in enforcement areas.
Raymond, but if the FBI guidelines got a few sentences on the back pages of the New York Times, another national national security question remained front-page news. And our look at the detentions at Guantanamo took us no further than Seton Hall Law School and a professor who brought a national controversy into a Newark classroom.
And this is all voluntary, so if we're not working together.
In this conference room in Seton Hall Law School.
If your clients are Tunisians from rural Tunisia, I mean, they have no reason to believe lawyers do anything.
These 1Ls are having an impact on the real lives of a particularly powerless group of defendants, the detainees at Guantanamo.
I said, how can I get involved? It's really self-selecting. How can I make, a difference with it? How can I contribute?
2 years ago, Mark Denbo, his son Josh, and 7 Seton Hall students set out to determine just who is being held at Guantanamo, analyzing thousands of pages of Defense Department documents.
If you looked at any one detainee, it looked like that might be the wrong person there. But it turned out if you looked at all of them, it became clear that almost all of them were the wrong people there.
The result, 2 reports from Denbo and son and students that used those government documents to conclude what had been for years suspected, that the vast majority of the prisoners at Guantanamo, the so-called worst of the worst, were not the vicious terrorists that the government still insists they are.
92% of those detained in Guantanamo, it'd be funny if it weren't so pathetic, are being held there because somebody, usually tribal chiefs or village people or relatives or enemies, have turned people over for a bounty.
And that confirmed what Denbo had learned about his own 2 Guantanamo clients, men he has so far been unable to help.
And Mark Denbo's own 2 clients remain in Guantanamo, along with nearly 250 others. But with the coming of a new president, the question is, what's next for the notorious detention center?
Well, we can look at the campaign, Raymond, when Barack Obama was very clear that Guantanamo was a stain on America and should be closed. We can also look at what's happened since November 4th. Many calls, not from the left, but from the middle and from the right, saying, wait a minute, go slow. You can't just close this place. There are too many complicating factors. Fair position?
Well, I think we have to look at the fact that there are 2 Guantanamos. One is a trope, a symbol politically, internationally, and domestically of our departure as a nation from the rule of law.
That's got to go.
Got to go, so it means within a year he's got to close it and probably announce early he intends to do with it. But remaining are a host of other problems we associate with Guantanamo. Should we torture? What to do with people like Professor Denbo's clients, who everybody concedes really didn't do anything? What to do about prisoners of war in a war on terror that may last 20, 30, 40 years? Those are questions that are going to have to be resolved, but the complexity of those problems can't lead this president to keep Guantanamo open.
You've got some people whom we can expect will be and can be tried. Then you've got other people, say like Denbo's 2 clients, who perhaps should never have been there in the first place, whom nobody wants to try. But he says if they go back to Tunisia, they're going back to torture and 40 years in prison.
Well, like the Uyghurs from China, who would likely face the same fate in China. So those are complicated questions. To go back to our original point, the complexity of those questions can't cause us to keep Guantanamo open. And someday we're going to have to bite the bullet for having put people in Guantanamo who didn't deserve to have their liberty taken from them. We're going to have to deal with the issue of having them not be so resentful of America that they become terrorists, and deal with the fact that we made a mistake and we've now got to correct it.
Raymond, you're talking about biting the bullet. I talked recently with Mike Chertoff, whom we know well from New Jersey, but who has been the Bush Homeland Security chief. He said biting the bullet means that maybe we need to have indefinite detention without charges, without trials, for some of the people who have no place to go.
That's an absolutely unacceptable solution. The notion that everything has changed since 9/11 doesn't include indefinite detention of people who are not POWs and have not violated any law anywhere that we can prove.
What do we do then with the people who have no country to go to or would be going to a country where they would be tortured or even killed?
Sandy, if we can't find a way to integrate 250 people and a small number in the future into our society with support, with other kinds of monitors in place to make sure that they are not so alienated, then how do we expect to be able to carry out projects like dealing with the tribal areas of Pakistan in the context of the war on terror. It's all part of a large effort to do something that's imaginative but essential to maintain our reputation and the reality of commitment to the rule of law.
But, Raymond, these were people who for 7 years were abused, locked up, and, if we can believe Professor Denbo, with no reason. Do you really want those people on the streets of New York or San Francisco?
I'm not thrilled with it, but I find it even more objectionable to say that because we wrongfully locked them up for 7 years, now let's wrongfully lock them up for 70.
And finally, the ones who are going to be tried. What kinds of trials are we talking about? Are we talking about just going into regular federal court?
That's a possibility. I think it's much more likely that we'll either have a national security network like Professor Tribe is suggesting, which I'm not thrilled about, or a modification of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which we've been using for a century to try violations of the laws of war.
More hard questions for Barack Obama. Raymond, Guantanamo as detention center is a post-9/11 phenomenon, quite different from our final story, which goes back hundreds of years in American history. And it was something a few hundred years overdue when the New Jersey legislature finally said, sorry for slavery.
Keep a steppin', sister. Keep a steppin', sister.
African enslavement in early America. The horrors, the inhumanity, the great sin of the South. It's what we saw 30 years ago when roots shocked America.
Have to use the whip so many times on him, it's a wonder he's got any hind left on him.
But it wasn't just the South. There was slavery right here in the North, in New Jersey.
The slavery that most Americans know about is the plantation slavery of the so-called Old South. That was not the system followed here. Now, that isn't to suggest that there were not places where goodly numbers of African slaves were found.
Case in point, this early 18th century farmhouse in South Brunswick, and the 3 tiny dark attic rooms which local historians say housed, for generations, a dozen or more slaves.
New Jersey is pretty ignorant to the fact that there was slavery here. There are people that know, but the average person walking around in New Jersey has no idea.
It's not just about slavery, but the relationship of blacks to whites in this setting.
Like the relationship of a slave here named Amy. The family that lives here now wouldn't let us come in, but a bill of sale that they're said to have found marks the purchase of Amy in 1815 for $50.
Slavery lasted longer here than in any other northern state, but New Jersey was not unique in its history of racism and enslavement.
And the election of a black president in the same year that New Jersey finally coughed up an apology for centuries of slavery, followed by another 150 years of racial discrimination. Well, Raymond, no wonder it has struck us as ironic and amazing.
It is ironic, Sandy, maybe layers and layers of irony, when you consider that we've had a presidential campaign in which an African-American ran a largely deracinated campaign in which he appealed to a broad spectrum of voters as a sort of substitute for dealing with hard questions about not just slavery, if you think apology is useful, as well as the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow and their continued impact on racial justice issues, poverty questions, and others that are tinged with race.
And yet here we have decidedly elected a black president at the same time that no American president has properly apologized for slavery, that while the House of Representatives has done an apology recently, the full Congress has not. Is this part of our schizophrenia on the great American dilemma?
American dilemma is the phrase of Gunnar Myrdal 2 generations ago for our failure as a nation to look squarely at questions of race and the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. It's interesting that if you look at Obama's election, it didn't resolve those issues, it didn't chase the dilemma away, but the euphoria reflects a broad consensus, even among McCain supporters, that maybe we struck a blow at white supremacy. Left open is the question of how this president will then confront direct issues of race.
We've seen him moving toward the center in all things. This, however, is an area where we can expect that there's special feeling on his part, How much do you think he will stick his nose out on the issues of race and equality and the vestiges of slavery?
He won't do it until he has to. When he does, I suspect he'll handle it with maybe as much skill as he did the problems of Reverend Wright, but we'll have to see. And I think the body politic is going to give him some room to make some mistakes and to take some chances.
You know, there's never been the kind of excitement in my lifetime that there was for this election, this presidency, and where there are great expectations, there are great risks, and Raymond, an awful lot to have to live up to.
It's true. And we'll have at least 4 years to watch an Obama presidency and see how it impacts ongoing problems of race in this country. But for now, we wrap this 13th Emmy-winning season of Due Process.
And we hope you'll continue to join us in season 14 for the kind of stories you won't find elsewhere. Our unique take on questions of law and justice.
Till then, for Sandy and all of us here at Due Process, Henrietta Parker, Christine Ekman, Laurel Spira, Pat Scannella, Richard Kretschmer, John Jorgensen, and all of the field and studio and control room folks who get us on the air each week, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
These 1Ls are having an impact on the real lives of a particularly powerless group of defendants, the detainees at Guantanamo. The District of Columbia took a radical step and outlawed all handguns. The inevitable challenge went up to the nation's highest court. The decision is now in.
He blew his life away.
His family didn't have a clue that Jesse could have been at risk, but his mother said they might have if he'd been tested in school. New FBI guidelines on investigation of U.S. citizens? Is it officially sanctioned racial profiling? A threat to constitutional rights or needed protection here on home soil?
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy.